Okay. Well, one of the things tonight, as a bit of a twist of a subject, is to talk about the four elements, which is a major part of the forest tradition as well as early Buddhism, to talk about the four elements not only as a meditation method, but also as a contemplation and as a way of living. And it's a very, very beautiful system. We don't often hear about it so much, but it's quite a classic way and a very direct way of letting go, of relaxing, of being at peace with your situation. The four elements basically, sometimes it's also described as six, but generally it's four, is referred to as earth, water, wind and space and consciousness and fire and all the rest of it. But it's much, much easier to see them as solids, liquids, gases and energy. It's far more relatable that way. So when we look at the system of the universe as being, and again, this is a very, very old way of looking at it. This is before the table of, Mendeleev's table of elements and everything else. This is the classic way they used to look at it, is in terms of solids, liquids, gases and energy, and how they interact with one another, and how they essentially make up the foundation of the universe and what we're all made of. And this is, in a way, a very calming way to... I'm not sure what that's... You're muted now. What has happened? Are we still going okay? I think it's okay. We're having a little bit of sound problem in the background. But, welcome to samsara. The four elements are a good system because they're very spacious, very large, very open. So when you walk out, straight away you can get a sense of the world, both outside of us and inside ourselves. Often it's in a Forest Sangha way dealt with being as the contemplation of the body is usually where it's linked to. And that's not commonly taught to lay people so much, generally because you have to remember this long list of body parts and investigate those during meditation and everything else, which is a long drawn process. You can actually experience it on a much, much simpler way. And that is recognizing that all the solids that make us up are the same across the world, across the universe. All the little elements and everything else that make up our skin and bones and our body and everything else, as well as the stuff that we have and the trees, the plants, the rocks, the sky, the sun, the planets, everything else. They're all solids. They're the same elements that make us up. And the same with all the liquids, all the gases, all the energy in the world. Is this great play off each other. And it's what makes us up too. So when we start to look at this internally, we start to see that this separation we have between us and others, us and the rest of the world, is actually very flimsy. In fact, it's just an idea. And the big problem we have is that because we're constantly relating to ourselves, this is me, this is you, this is me, this is something else, this is us, this is them, they're the enemy, we must destroy, and all this kind of story that we see played out again and again and again, least of all if you've ever studied history at school or as a hobby. The world is full of millennia of this kind of story, this division between us and the rest of the world, when realistically this is a direct way of seeing that this division doesn't really exist. But it's spacious because you can feel the wind of fresh breeze and recognize that that air that fills the world, that is produced by the plants and the oceans and everything else, that we breathe in, it's part of us. We breathe out, we're part of it too. We're part of this giant ecosystem of the world. The same with the water that comes in the streams and the rivers and out of the tap and in the oceans, again, is the same water that we drink in that's part of us and everything else. And this continues on, stepping out into the sun and feeling that energy. And that's part of us as well. That's how we function. That's how everything else. This great complexity of life. And it's very soothing and healing in a way as well. Because when we step out and see, say, a branch covered with new leaves or flowers, perhaps after the winter or generally, it's very healing to see that this happens to all life. This growth, this change and everything else. That even when things can be so, so bad, we can still turn a new leaf. Life finds a way. And it's very, very beautiful. And the beauty of it is we also see karma in this process as well, because we see how everything is a series of cause and effect, this great interplay of everything else. But as we as human beings, we see how our decisions play out in the world, because we are not separate from the world. And that straight away empowers us, but it also gives us a little bit of responsibility. And that responsibility isn't something we should be afraid of. The problem is we have so many burdens. We have work, we have cost of living crisis, we have health problems, we have political problems, we have economic problems. We can go on forever about all the problems in the world. But this is a very calming way, a very simple way to connect back with something vaster, something more beautiful. And it's more soothing just to look out and look at the beautiful sky, the forest or the park or a garden if you have one, or even just a potted plant if you have one, or even if it's just your pet cat or dog. They're participating in the same world. And our decisions play out in that world as well, which gives us so much opportunity to do good, to choose something beautiful, to make something of our lives and not waste our lives. And that's something that's really, really hard to find in the world. We're so busy, we're so under the pressure, we have, as I said before, there's a long list of things we have to face and deal with. And yet we can always come back to the present moment. We can always access the present moment through this vastness of the universe, played out through the four elements as such, as a contemplation. And it's a very, very beautiful system that way. But it's also something majestic about it. There's something awe-inspiring about it. To step out and see the vastness of the world. We think ourselves as this tiny, small little bubble so often, trapped in our own little sufferings and miseries and anxieties and fears and to-do lists and everything else, and disappointments. And yet stepping out of that to reconnect to something vaster is such a relief. It's so open, and it's always been there. And it's always available to us. It's much harder now that we are urban creatures in an urban jungle, because we're surrounded by people, we're surrounded by buildings. It's much, much harder to see this looking up through skyscrapers and just seeing this crack of sky, and sometimes that's all you see. It's much, much harder to connect. But you can still do it. Sometimes that's just enough. And being able to delight in just being enough is really special. Because when we look at how all this works, this is an amazing, complex system of how it all interacts and how it can actually work. Thich Nhat Hanh famously said, the real miracle is not to walk on water, it's to walk on the earth. And that was very nicely put. Just the simplicity is something amazing. That we can breathe, that we can talk, that we can see, that we can hear. That much of life is amazing in itself. But also the spaciousness of it is useful when we have a scope of how vast the universe is. A lot of our worries start to disappear. Sometimes it's because we have that ability to let go, to step out of that teeny-weeny little bubble, that little fortress that we build up to protect ourselves, that we don't need all the time. But also to reflect that this universe is changing and itself is chaotic. It's the nature of life. Throughout the galaxy and throughout the universe, stars are supernovaing, galaxies are crashing into each other, galaxies are being torn apart by black holes, and we think we've got problems. It's not so much a big deal. We can step back from a lot of our problems and relax a bit. And the thing is that by looking at how all this plays together as an interaction and looking at it internally, it can be very soothing and healing, as I said before, but it's great for a deeper insight, a deeper understanding, because we're a lot more tolerant when this body falls apart, when this body no longer listens to us, when our mind goes off and does everything that it wants to do without asking us, and all these other things. We can see that, miraculous as all this is, the architecture of the mind is not that impressive. The architecture of the body isn't that impressive either. The problem is that we are energy conservative. and that's a major part of life itself as well as the universe, is that because of that, we're willing to tolerate a huge amount of error in our system just to be able to function. And therefore, that's okay. That's the way it is. So we don't have to be worried so much when crazy thoughts pop into our heads, when we make mistakes, when we want to reach out for this but we miss, or we stub our toe, or all these things that we want or intend to do don't really play out as we expect them to. That's just the nature of life, and that's perfectly okay. So looking at this vaster system, being more open to it, is also a great basis for kindness and compassion to arise, because we see this plays out for everybody. This distinction that we have as me versus someone else, it disappears. We can be far, far more open. And therefore, we can have so much more joy when we stop and reflect on the small kindness of life, the small little things that people do, which are, when you look at it, when people do things against their self-serving instincts and just do something kind for other people, how amazing that is. And at the same time, when they waste their lives and just follow petty, small agendas and, corrupt decisions and so on and so on and so on, what a waste. How tragic that is. We can have compassion for them for wasting their lives and for not seeing the opportunities of really doing something more beautiful. And so in Buddhism itself, in early Buddhism, contemplating the four elements is a very, very big part. And it's best expressed, interestingly, in a sutta called The Discourse on the Elements, which is an interesting story because the Buddha travels through a village and arrives at an old friend of his who's a potter and wants to stay in his potter's shed. And the potter there sort of said, well, you're welcome to stay, but there's another monk in there, so if this monk is okay for you to be there, go for it, everything's fine. The Buddha goes in and there's this other monk there who happens to be a Buddhist. But this Buddhist does not recognize the Buddha. They've never met. Which kind of shows that the Buddha is someone far more human. He's not some walking around with great big shiny auras and all this flashing miracle stuff that you kind of see in the later texts. Ordinary people, and this particular monk was a very good meditator, could not distinguish, could not recognize the Buddha when he walked in the room. And so the Buddha, in this anonymous guise, sort of not revealing himself yet, gives a talk on the four elements and shows what they are in terms of the solids being everything we're made of. The bones, the skin, everything firm and solid, and how it all coheres together, and the liquids and the gases and the energy and everything else makes us what we are. But then it gets more interesting, because he sort of says, the more you let go of these things, because you recognize they're impermanent, they belong to the universe, not to us, the more we can let them go and the easier it becomes. And we're not so worried when things fall apart. In fact, it's a relief when things fall apart, when they go their own way. There's this beautiful Zen saying, which I heard many years ago, that described what it's like when an arahat or an enlightened person passes away, and they described it as a snowflake dissolving into pure air. Well, in this part of the world, we don't have snow, so I can very easily describe what a drop of water does on a hot Perth pavement. It's very similar. Just dissolves away in an instant. But it returns back to the universe. Nothing lost, nothing created, nothing destroyed. And it's very soothing. We recognize that even if we screw up our lives so terribly, we can turn a new leaf. Things will turn back to how they were before. And that's okay. It's a huge relief. And then as we go on further into this story where the Buddha's talking to this monk who doesn't recognize him, and talks about the stillness and the equanimity and all these other things that go part of deepening this practice, being okay with the present moment, because we recognize that how it is just how the universe is. And then he starts to talk about recognizing what this self is and its relationship to the rest of the world, because it's not separate. And he says that this I, this me, this mind, this you, this us, this them, theirs, everything else, is just an idea. In fact, he uses a very, very interesting term for it. He says it's our imagination. And our imagination starts to get very interesting here. Because the way the senses work is really fascinating. But at the same time, it's also slightly flawed because, as I said before, it's willing to tolerate a lot of errors because it's easy to function. To have everything perfect consumes a huge amount of energy. It's really hard. So our eyes, for example, are seeing things, hearing things through our ears and everything else. And our eyes do not distinguish the difference between me on your computer screen versus me in your living room. But I'm not in your living room. I might be down the road or I might be on the other side of the planet for some of you. Our eyes don't distinguish the difference between something that we see on a screen versus something in real life. But it's cross-reference to the mind that says, this is a figure on a screen. You know, it's not someone who's really here. When it comes to our imagination, it's not able to distinguish something real from not real. The mind can't do it. It has to cross-reference with everything with its senses. That's why when you have a nightmare at night, you wake up gasping for breath and your heart beating, everything else, as if you're really being chased down the street by monsters or falling out of an aeroplane or whatever. And for someone who has a fear of heights, when they stand at the edge of a ledge and they feel that shudder as if they are actually falling. The mind can't distinguish imagination from reality. It needs to cross-reference with all the other senses all the time to be able to make sense of the world, for everything to cohere and make sense for us to function. And so this is a very, very fascinating thing. The imagination in the mind cannot distinguish itself. It can't tell the difference between fantasy and fact. Now, interestingly, in Buddhism, we actually use this quite a bit. We actually take advantage of this, which most people don't realize. When we imagine metta, loving kindness and compassion, we imagine someone dear to us and sending love to them and kindness to them and forgiveness and all these beautiful qualities. That affects the mind as if it's real, as if that person is there in front of us. We can develop that emotion exactly the same way as if they're there in front of us. As much as I'm just on your computer screen, I'm not there in your living room. We can still interact as if we are really in front of each other. And so there's a lot of interesting things and a lot of interesting tricks that we can start to do with the imagination. We can start to imagine what it would be like to have all these beautiful human qualities. What it would be like to experience peace and contentment and stillness and freedom. And because the mind can't distinguish so easily between them, it can experience a little bit of it. And because we can experience a little bit of it, we have a teeny weeny taste, a little idea, and we move towards that. We try to apply that in our daily life until we no longer need to try to do anything. We just are applying that in our daily life. We're living it. And that's how this can play out in a very, very useful and interesting way. This imagination can be a very useful tool if we're prepared to use it that way, because the mind can't distinguish it from fact and fiction. It needs to cross-reference all the time. Ultimately, of course, this has its downsides. You know, if someone there is in front of me and they're starving to death and I just imagine them to have a nice big meal and everything else, that's not going to get food in their tummy. Giving, acting in the world is going to do that. So it always has to cross over. But this action that we do has to arise from the intention. And that's the basis of karma in Buddhism. What the Buddha said very clearly, what he calls karma, action, is intention. Action is always predicated by intention, our decisions. And by using our awareness, we can inform our decisions much, much better. We can inform our intentions so much better to be a better human being, but also to have the freedom, the happiness, the joy, the ability to let go. And this is what's so wonderful about the four elements as a system. Because even though it's often presented as this dry list of body parts and everything else, as in the Visuddhimagga and in the text as well, it's a very, very direct way of experiencing emptiness. And emptiness is something that we have a bit of a difficulty with as human beings. Quite frankly, we're terrified of it. It's the last thing we want. We spend 99.999% of our life trying to get away from it, trying to fill that hole, try to cover it up, try to make it go away, to fill it with something. For goodness sakes, don't fall apart on me, kind of thing. That's what the ego is saying all the time, desperately trying to hold everything together. And that's because we have a terrible relationship with the emptiness. We have a terrible relationship with ourselves, with life as a whole. And we can change that. It doesn't have to be this way. We can change our relationship with the fundamental reality of the world, this emptiness. And of course, as the Zen tradition very sagely says, emptiness is nothing. I mean, it's not nothing. Emptiness and form is emptiness. Same thing. It's that everything is changing, everything is forming. There's one way which I always used to describe this is like a washing machine. You put in dirty clothes, clean water and soap, start the machine going, churn, spin. What do you end up with? Clean clothes, dirty water and soap. Same thing. Everything's different, nothing's the same, but nothing has really been created or destroyed in this. And this is playing out, this small little system, just chucking things into the washing machine, just shows how it comes from dirty to clean in one system. Plays out in the rest of the world. Everything is interacting. The universe is churning away, spinning away. Everything is changing in that, but nothing is being created, nothing being destroyed. And that solves itself so many problems. When we see so much vastness and so much more interest in the world around us, but also ourselves, coming back to that emptiness in the present moment, we realize that a lot of the problems we have, a lot of the personal difficulties we have, are because we're stuck in our imagination built on I, me, mine, you, us, ours, them, this competitive, frustrating world, that the moment that we installed in our imagination this self-centered position, it will never be fulfilled. It will always be disappointed. And we'll always be running around trying to achieve that, and then taking out our frustrations on ourselves and on others. And that's how the world has in many ways arrived where it is. So the beauty is, with Buddhism as large, but just this small little section of Buddhism called the Four Elements, or the study of it, can give us so much back, can give us so much happiness, so much joy, so much peace and space, and we can turn over a new leaf. So, I've been going on for about half an hour. Shall we jump into the meditation? I'm getting a lot of thumbs up. That's a good sign. All right, so as usual, everybody please stand up. Give yourself a bit of a shake. Adjust your clothes as you need to. Adjust your cushion, adjust your chair, and do all the things you need to do. It is always good to move the body and get the energy, because we've been sitting for half an hour already. You're going to start to fall asleep if you're not careful, that's the thing. So, when we're ready, settle into the chair and just relax for a moment. Just feel ourselves just settling into the chair. And adjust your arms and legs and everything as you need to. And when you're ready, you can close your eyes. And we'll start looking at the tension in our body, which is a solid. Tension in the muscles, tension in the bones, and relax it. And just spend those moments just relaxing. Not being separate. Not being lonely. And as we breathe in, use your breathing to relax as well. Remembering every wonderful breath of fresh air is the air that's blown around the world. It's been absorbed by plants and the ocean. How wonderful it is to have this air. And if you can bring that wonder and joy as you breathe in, let it spread through your entire body, through your entire mind. Filled completely with joy. And as you're being present, explore the interaction between the breathing and the body, the tensions that arise and the softness that forms. How they're completely relative to each other. Let your body relax so much that there's no difference between you and the chair, that it's all one thing. Now see if you can be aware of the energy flowing through your body and your mind. And see how you can relax this flow. If there's any tensions or blockages, to let them dissolve. This is the same energy of which the universe is made. Isn't that a wonderful thing? How amazing it is. Use your breathing now to relax the energy, to allow it to become more settled, smoother, calmer. More at ease at being part of this vastness, part of this universe. imagine a beautiful clear stream of flowing water, whether it's in a forest or a garden. Imagine this water flowing. And as you reach out and touch it, allow all your troubles to flow into that water and dissolve away. And consider this water as it flows through our veins, in our blood, and our tears, and yet it fills the oceans and the rivers and falls from the sky as rain. And have a sense how vast and how wonderful this is. imagine now that since these elements that make us up fill the entire universe, that there is no separation between us and everything else. And so imagine filling the entire universe with kindness, with forgiveness, with joy. If we imagine a mind without barriers, how vast can we make it? And how beautiful can we make it? A mind of loving kindness, as vast as the night sky, to fill the entire universe. Okay, when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay, so welcome back. If there's any questions or any comments, please dive in.
I have a question, Sampa.
Yep, go for it.
Actually, it's funny that you talked about emptiness and things like that now, because a few weeks ago I read a book from the Dalai Lama. It's called How to See Yourself as You Really Are. And he really talks a lot about the importance of recognizing that the I, or what he says, the inherent independent existence doesn't exist, and there's an illusion, or like an illusion, he says. What I don't understand really is how it works, and I think I asked you that before with reincarnation. I mean, he mentions then there is the so-called near I. So, there is some sort of I, but it's not like the ego that we experience in our, or that we think we experience in our life as such. So I was wondering if you could talk about that. And then I also have another question for you that's related to that is, how you say that our mind cannot distinguish between illusion and, reality as such. And I think I did kind of experience that when I was a child, and I probably meditated without knowing what meditation really is, and I got kind of scared. Probably when I went into something that I felt like I can't, distinguish. So I really started kind of saying to myself, okay, I need to cling to reality, I need to cling to rational thought, right? Which is not helpful in meditation. So I'm wondering how do you get out of that, when your mind maybe notices that there's not necessarily that distinction, and you're kind of, how do you stay, how can you make sure that you're not losing your marbles? Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Because I think that really scared me a long time ago, and now I can't get away from that rational thought anymore.
Okay. Well, the first part, the thing about the self as such, it is an idea, and it's something which is a very, very useful tool for us to be able to navigate the world. It starts very, very early on, and you can read a part in evolutionary psychology, looks at this a lot, but it's basically the tool that we have to distinguish something beneficial versus something harmful. So this is a red berry, it's perfectly safe to eat. That's a red berry, it's poisonous, don't touch it. That dog is a village pet, that's fine to play with. That one's a wolf, don't go near it. So we're constantly distinguishing between the two. And this self is a very effective way of navigating the world. Me, other, works a treat. Problem is, it's just a function of the mind. It doesn't actually have any reality of itself. We can build relationships with each other through this. And the interesting thing is, when we look at early Buddhism, the Buddha talks about the self quite a lot, because he doesn't try to reinvent different words for it. It becomes almost impossible for us to talk about a subjective world without including a sense of me and mine, because that's how we interpret the world. So the Buddha is perfectly fine in talking about that, but it's just a psychological or conventional self that doesn't have any ultimate reality. And so it's this shift in Buddhist practice. At the beginning, we're still relating to things versus me and other, me, you, us, them, and therefore we try and build a positive relationship between these things until eventually we can recognize that these things aren't really things at all. They're not separate from each other, they're interactive. The elements, the solids, liquids, gases, energy, all playing off each other. This long series of cause and effect. It's all sort of connected in that way. But of course that's more ultimate reality. We have to be comfortable with the emptiness to be able to reach that. We're interpreting the world through a big firewall through a fortress, basically, to be able to navigate the world, because it's very effective, but it's also very dangerous. We recognize there's danger. We recognize that we don't know what that plant is or what that animal is and how to deal with it, and we recognize that there's risk and everything else. So as a function to navigate the world, the idea of a self is brilliant, works a treat, can't fault it. Problem is, if we invest too much in it, it becomes a big, big problem. I often describe this as being like a screwdriver. If you use a screwdriver to put screws in the wall, works a treat. Can't get anything better. If you use a screwdriver to polish windows, on the other hand, or to stir cake batter, it's not the best thing in the world. It can do more harm than good. It's not really what it's built for. So this point of the self is important, that we have to start there until we're able to let that go. And that's a very, very big shift. To recognize that we're interpreting the world through this me, this mind, this what I am, and that's fine. But objectively, the real world says it's just an idea. So becoming more familiar with that idea, how it works and how it can go wrong, we can start to step out of it. We can start to step out of that fortress that we've built to navigate the world, to protect ourselves, to step out of that castle in the sky and be free. Now, when it comes to the emptiness, that requires us to build a good relationship with it so that we're no longer afraid of it. But that also means recognizing, again, that the self is not really a thing. And then there's nothing to even try to do, because the answer's always been there. Now, to the second question, when it comes to fiction versus reality and that the mind is not able to distinguish it, it's very easy to talk about that example of the nightmare. Is that when you're asleep, you might well be dreaming that you're being chased down the street by monsters, or some terrorist is there with a machine gun or something, and you wake up terrified because you're actually experiencing it. The mind cannot distinguish between the two. But the moment you open your eyes, it's cross-referencing against your situation. Oh, I'm in my bed, it wasn't real. And it can let go. It can go, it was just a dream. Because all of a sudden it's being able to see, okay, this is the context we're in. That was just a dream. And so that's really the difference. It requires this cross-referencing to the other senses to be able to make sense of the world and to be able to distinguish what's real and from what's not real. The problem is, again, works great in principle. These are conditioned phenomena, which means that how we are taught to interpret the world through these senses via the mind can prevent us from seeing clearly. So we can actually start spinning ourselves into all kinds of trouble. That's the thing I mentioned before about the architecture of the mind. It's not actually that impressive. It can tolerate a huge amount of errors to make things good enough, because that's all we need to survive. And yet, experientially, that can leave us in a horrible mess. And I think for pretty much everybody in the world, that's what they've been through. That's what they've experienced, this kind of thing sometimes in their daily life, is experiencing this inability for the mind to recognize a belief and an interpretation from an objective reality. So when we look at it deeper, such as an early experience when we sort of see that fear that arises, not being able to know what's going on, that uncertainty, all of a sudden throws a real spanner in the works. It really sets the machine off kilter, because now all of a sudden our cross-referencing is we can't trust it. If we wake up from our nightmare and yet we can't be sure whether we're really seeing things, is this another dream, what's going on, that can spiral things even more out of control and being even more horrific to experience. And so in that moment, it's often useful to come back to our breathing, coming back to our sensations, maybe just feeling, if for an example of waking up from a nightmare, feeling the pillow or the sheets and anything, going, oh yes, this is, I am really in my bedroom, it was just a dream. And being able to reassure ourselves with a little deeper cross-referencing that we can trust a little bit more. And that works great on a day-to-day basis, but if you want to be free of it on a deeper level, that anxiety will always arise when we're interpreting through this me versus other. And when we start to see a bigger picture that there is no separation between me and other, which does take a long time. For some people it might be very, very fast, but for the majority of us, we have to go slowly, slowly, gently, gently. And that's fine. But every little bit counts, where we start to build up more confidence in ourselves, more compassion and kindness for ourselves. We're not afraid to be with ourselves. And all of a sudden the world is a whole lot less frightening. So I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah.
A couple of people with their virtual hand up now, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go for it. Anybody want to jump in? Any questions?
Hi, this is Mark. I'll jump in.
Okay.
That is so helpful. That is the first time I can really actually remember the elements thing. Honestly, that is, can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm not great with technology. That is so helpful. I just wanted to say that, and also, talking about it in terms of solids, liquids, gases, and energy, I actually immediately can relate to it. That is just so helpful. And it just brings me to something I've been thinking about a lot, which is, I've been thinking about my mom and how she used her energy wisely, even though she was a single mother working full-time after my dad left after being a housewife for years and then going to school at night. I'm just, just so grateful for this woman, because she was grumpy and tired because she worked full-time, went to school to try to get her teaching certificate so that she could provide for 3 children who were all just sad after the family broke up. Anyway, the point is about wise energy, A, and B, how, I don't know if you can speak to the fact that, when the Buddha left his having everything and then went down to having nothing, said that was dangerous and unprofitable because it causes, when you're poor and oppressed, it causes hate, hopelessness, criminality. And I have experienced that. And that, I think, has to do with not having enough of those first elements, the solids, the liquids, and the gases, and breathing room and whatnot, that can give one the energy to expend or even have a choice to expend. And that would be shelter, food, healthcare, medicine, things of that nature. I don't know if you can speak to that or if you even have anything on that, but thank you for trying to explain all of that in a way that I can understand. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Wow. Thank you for having me. The thing is that the point that you raised that the Buddha said about having nothing, this is again a common experience for people, is that because they become accustomed to having so much stuff, so much freedom as well, being able to get pleasures out of our life, the moment we're cut off from that, we become miserable because we feel that we're deprived. A lot of our coping mechanisms can no longer function. A lot of our needs and everything else aren't being addressed. So we feel trapped, we feel miserable, we feel frustrated. And, at that time, we either try and steal to get it back. We try to launch out and punish others or to punish ourselves because we're angry, we're frustrated, because this situation of loss hurts. It does. And this shatters and really fractures and hurts the sense of self and the identity, very much so as children. When they experience major loss and everything else, it can turn their world upside down. Because, as I said before, this system we've built up of the self to be able to navigate the world is a fantastic system. It works a treat. It doesn't exist in real objective reality. It's still a subjective phenomena. But when that becomes shaken, particularly as a child, it's really, really hard, because all of a sudden we don't know what to trust, we don't know what to do, our world's turned upside down, it becomes a nightmare. And for some people, their escape is drugs, it's alcohol, it's violence, it's, turning vengeance on the world because nobody cares, etc., etc., etc. we can be going on a long time about this. It's a major part of life. And as long as we keep trapping ourselves in that cycle of sort of, in a way, it can become a victim mentality, but it's just a general experience of suffering, it can turn us into monsters. And the choice is returning to the vastness, to the solids, liquids, gases, energy, how it's part of the universe, how we're not separate from the universe, we're not separate from nature, even though we're destroying it so much because we hate ourselves so much, and we're taking, trying to get pleasures by destroying the environment, or vice versa. We can't stand beauty because it's so ugly in our hearts and everything else. It goes on, unfortunately. We have to learn how to change our relationships. And coming back to the present moment is very, very helpful. But again, it takes time. It's a matter of priorities. But the joy is that it can be done. The relief is we can, even when it's so hard, even when we're banging our head against the wall, we still come back to the present moment because there's nowhere else in the universe to go. So we could be talking a whole night about this, and hope it helps. But thank you for having me.
Thank you, that does help. Coming back to the present moment does help. The issue is that there really is an absolute reality. I've slept in stairwells because I had to, because I was in stairwells. I had nowhere to sleep. Homeless shelters, battered women's shelters, halfway houses, jails, hospitals, and it was truly, it was real. It was absolute reality. And I don't mind coming back to the present moment. It's the future that can be scared, but I was just praising my mom for having the energy or the foresight to spend her energy getting the solids and liquids for us met. She had breakfast on the table every morning, even though she had to leave at like 7. She had family breakfast on the table for everybody and family dinner at night. So just getting those basic needs met for us, I just feel so grateful. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lita, do you want to go?
Vicky, you can go ahead first. Mine is quite quick, so you go ahead.
Okay, I think mine's quite quick too, but thank you. Thank you, Ajahn. I think that was the first time I really understood those concepts. I've listened to other monks talk about that. And I have cancer, so I've got tumours. And also, the interesting, because that was that when you were talking about liquids and air and earth, it was like this, and I absolutely feel this body is falling apart and going back to as you said, like to the universe. So there was some comfort in that. It didn't feel so scary when you were saying it like that. And I have a drain because I've got fluid that needs to come out. So I've got liquid. There's like all these things you were talking about, and I was going, oh yeah. So in the meditation, it was interesting because I was when you were talking about the stream in particular, I was able somehow in the imagination to soften the tumour, and it sort of almost goes into liquid. Mm. So I'm going to do that more. Thank goodness we got this saved, because I don't know, I've heard, and I'm scared to think that you can imagine tumours away, but I do hear in talks about the power of imagination and imagining something. So did any of that make sense?
Oh yes.
Oh, is it? Okay, so I can't tell these days if I'm making sense or not. I don't know. Because if I say that to people that are non-Buddhist, they look at me with like, oh, she's in denial. That's what I get a lot. They think I'm in denial. And I think I'm not in denial. I'm absolutely living with my reality. But to ease the suffering, there is ways to do that. So thank you. That eased some of my suffering, definitely. So that was just a comment, really. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a thing which using our imagination can help in so many ways. There's a lot of time that it can't fix everything. It can't make the world a better place. We can't imagine ourselves being the King of England or the President of the United States, whatever, and fix everything. We don't have the power to do that. But the body and the mind is very sensitive to imagination, and sometimes it helps immensely to imagine ourselves as, particularly in a sense of forgiveness and everything else, more in a sense of acceptance and contentment, that it's okay to be human. It's okay for this stuff to happen. And, it's not so frightening anymore. And so that is something that's worth sort of cultivating, because to go for cancer surgery, it still requires scalpels and doctors and surgeons and anaesthetics and everything else. It still needs those things. And yet we can improve our recovery, we can improve our experience of it so much better by bringing it into the present and not being afraid of it. So thank you for having me again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mine is also a comment and an observation, Bhante. I have always found the elements meditation, even when I hear about it, it's as if the detail is kind of lacking on how to actually do it in practice. So today, after your instructions, after your comments, I was doing my walking meditation rather than sitting. And what I noticed for the first time was the ground. Because normally my experience is of the foot, the sensations on my foot, and then the movement, touching and moving. What I was aware of today that I normally don't notice is the ground. It's as if the ground was pushing back, the actual solidness of the ground. I hadn't somehow noticed before. So that made me, that connection was made then of the elements here and the elements around. So I just wanted to make that observation, and thank you for triggering it.
Yay! It's wonderful to have those kinds of experiences, because all of a sudden it's not just me on the walking path doing my bit, looking at the clock, I've got to do this for half an hour, and I've got 45 minutes left to go, and da-da-da-da. All of a sudden it becomes this vast, open experience that includes everything. And that's so amazing. And it's wonderful to be part of it, to see that we're not separate from the earth, we're not separate from the air around us, and, the light and the energy and everything else. It's one great big play of events. That's just, it's astonishing. It's something that gives me a lot of joy anyway. So, happy to share it.
Just want to say, it's interesting you bring up the energy thing, because I meditate for so long, but I never noticed that. But just when you mentioned the energy thing, and then I suddenly noticed that my energy is very much turned inward, because I feel people. And then I think, because I imagine, I can kind of feel like my energy is surrounding me, and then they're turning inward. And then if I imagine people, they will tend to turn inward. But if I imagine they're animals, and then I will feel like energy just do not turn so much inward anymore, but it's more relaxed, that kind of thing. And then I would imagine Ajahn Brahm, and then I think his energy is also very much turning outward. And then I think it's really interesting, because it's like the shapes of, I don't know, the general kind of feeling. And then when you say that, be with the universe, And then I think I kind of cannot do that because I think outside is scary. And then you say that we are all the same, and then I'm afraid that I will be the same with my parents for a long time, and then I'm really scared. Like we are the same. No, I don't want to be the same with them. And then it's just like this kind of thing. And then this is the observation. And then I have the question is like, so with metta meditation, the other day when I was, because now I sometimes throughout the day I will say like, may I be well, may I be happy. And then one day I suddenly think that if I'm not my body, I'm not my thoughts. Like I'm not my emotion, I'm not my perception. And then I'm like, when I say it, when I was saying may I be well, and then I'm like, so what am I really? Does that make sense?
Oh yes.
Like may I, and then I'm like, what am I? What is the target? What is the target for the metta? And then I'm like, what does that? I don't know. Does that make sense? But I don't have any other ways to how to say, when I say may other people be well, and it's also like the target is not clear. Yes, that's my question.
No problem. The thing here, which you've raised, Gloria, is actually right at the heart of the issue, is that because we navigate the world through this me and other, we started our metta practice, me versus metta to someone else, right? So the moment that this sense of me disappears, all of a sudden it gets a bit fuzzy, doesn't it? It's not very clear. What do I do? What do I go for? And these processes kick back in, and we start to try and re-establish me, other, because it's the easy way we navigate the world. It's very important to us. And so this is not anything to be worried about at all. This is the fascinating, juicy stuff. This is really where we get to explore what's going on and what's our relationship with the world. Because again, when we've got this built-in fear that I don't want to be like my parents, I'm afraid of this person, I don't want to be like them, all of a sudden that creates that energy bubble around us that's coming inwards, because our point of reference is always inwards. Metta is always going outwards, to an extent. Metta is actually all-inclusive, so it includes all this as well as the other. But the deeper and deeper you go in metta, all of a sudden there's no me and other being metted, to really bend the language. So it becomes really, really tricky. But actually it doesn't. Here's where it gets really fun, because all of a sudden it's just the metta. It's no longer me giving metta to someone else. That's still a little subtle ego position, which we rely on to navigate. Now we're going beyond that. We're letting that go. And we're filling the entire universe with metta, which needs no barriers, no boundaries. And it's freedom in that, because it can fill everything. And we no longer need to be afraid of anything, because we recognize that fundamentally everything is solids, liquids, gases and energy. There is no separation there. But we still require this model of me and other when we haven't finished with it yet, when we still need it to navigate the world. And a lot of people kind of get in trouble here, because they recognize instinctively this me versus other, this way we navigate the world is really, really important. And it is. It works great. We can't function without it. But we no longer believe in it. We no longer think it has absolute reality. It's a tool all of a sudden. It's going to using a screwdriver just for putting in tools, and then the moment we're on our own, we don't need this ego anymore. And we can be free of it. And we can let this stuff go. And we can be happy just being in the present moment, just as we are, just as it is. So, again, we could be talking about this all night, but does that kind of get close to what you were asking?
Just to confirm one thing, so it's like if your loving kindness is strong enough, it will like a tsunami, like push down any wall that you try to create. Is that right?
It can do, but it's more that once you realize that it's all solids, liquids, gases, energy, there are no walls to break down. It's just that it's a bit like a tsunami. You can imagine it as being water just filling open space, but all of a sudden there's no walls there that it needs to push down. It just fills everything automatically anyway. And that's a real joy of the metta and compassion and all these other sort of emotional practices. They just automatically fill the space. We don't need to try and do it. It loves to fill the space. It loves having that freedom, the vastness, no longer being imprisoned in this tiny little me, and being free of all our little day-to-day problems. Yes, we still need to work in the world. Yes, we still need to relate to people. But all of a sudden we recognize that this means that we have a relating to people and interacting with people is just a means. It's just a tool. It's just a way for us to go to the shops, get our shopping, pay the bills, do our jobs, get home, chill. So the beauty of it is that metta is not this force that has to smash through things. It's this thing that fills everything. And that's very soothing, comforting in a way.
Yes, that's the wisdom, I think. Thank you so much.
As we've been talking the whole time, there's two words that keep coming into my head: quantum theory. And it's just everything's in touch with everything, And that's all I can think of as you're talking about it. I keep thinking quantum theory, where everything's in touch. There's no separations. There's nothing. It's just all there.
Yeah. See, the thing is, quantum theory is quite a modern idea, and it's the thing is, if the Buddha used the word quantum theory 2,500 years ago, nobody would have any idea what he's talking about. So he's using language relative to the people who would be able to understand it back then. That's why a lot of the time he doesn't talk about these bigger, more interesting things about the universe, because people just wouldn't understand it. And that's why he kind of culled down. There's this famous simile that he gives of it being a handful of leaves. He says that all this stuff that I know is like this forest full of leaves, and yet all I really give you is just this handful of leaves, because this is really all we need to talk about, which upsets a lot of people in our modern time, because they feel like the Buddha's being stingy and he knew all this other stuff that he's not sharing. But it's really more that even if he could talk about this stuff, nobody would understand him anyway. Because it's only in the last few hundred years, for example, since Einstein, that we've been able to talk about general relativity and special relativity. And even with quantum theory, only in the last couple of years have we been able to talk about this. So it's, perfectly valid.
John, you have certainly generated a lot of really interesting and engaged questions and reflections through your talk tonight and the meditation. Many thanks to you for coming and sharing your time and wisdom and practice with us. Maybe if there's a blessing you would like to leave us with, we would be very grateful to receive it.
Okay, here we go. Nati me saranang anyang buddho me saranang warang etena satya wajena sotite hotu sabbada. Nati me saranang anyang dhammo me saranang warang etena satya wajena sotite hotu sabbada. Nati me saranang anyang sangho me saranang warang etena satya wajena sotite hotu sabbada. So, thank you for having me.